Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Product Analytics 1510 front-end team kickoff. Um, to start us off, some good news to share. Alvin from compliance will be joining our front-end team. So that brings our tally up to 3. And yeah,
Three Musketeers.
yes, he's based in New Zealand. So we'll need to figure out probably a new time slot for this call, or possibly make it completely async. I have a coffee chat with him tomorrow, which I'll also bring this up.
Yeah,
Um,
find out. I'm relatively flexible. Mornings is harder for me, honestly. Like my mornings, because I often have to take the kids to school at the same time that we'd normally be having one of these meetings. So if I have to jump back on to work in the evening to catch him, then and his morning, then I can do that if needed. Or we
yeah,
can go async.
we'll maybe need to go async because I think his morning is very late in our evening. Um, remembering from he was my or I was his onboarding buddy, and I remember from our meetings that it was oftentimes 10, 11 p.m. for me at night. Um,
I'm up then. My wife is fast asleep, but that's not a problem. She won't mind.
And then moving on, we have the planning issue for 15 Please have a look. But I feel like the main focus we really just need to discuss here is completing the internal preview. That's the main thing that we want to keep in mind for the front end. And Rob, you had a item to discuss there.
Yeah, the largest item still within the internal preview is also marked as the second point in the planning issue. Bit weird. Um, and then that is the shared listing work that I'm doing currently, which is uh, currently has 2 MRs in review, 1 MR I'm working on, and 2 more MRs on top of that. It's about 4,000 lines of code that has had to be broken down into some manageable chunk of work. Could have been multiple issues, to be fair. I could have easily broken this down into more details, but overall, the actual implementation plan makes sense. It's just each one of those points ended up being a lot more lines of code than I originally assumed it would be.
Considering the amount of code and file changes, would you say it's fair to bump the weight up from a 3 to at least a 5?
No, no, it's not complicated. That's the problem. It's just lots of lines because we are literally copying what now 4 months, 5 months, maybe longer worth of code from the entire team, Tim, Max, us, Axel, everyone that was here. That is why there's so many lines. It's not because it's hard. I mean, it took me a few days to copy it all over. It's just a real pain to maneuver that much work. So I'd still class it as a free because it's just lots of lines and files that need to be copied. And your idea of actually of porting over, of migrating the components and then referencing them in the old frontend analytics instead was a really good idea to reduce that line count rather than directly copying them. So that has helped.
Yeah, I still feel like in terms of just surfacing the amount of work that this is, and the amount of time that it takes, so that we can get a better idea of tracking the amount of work that we can accomplish as a team. I feel like 5 would be a better representation than 3. Because I
Problem
feel
is,
like with the amount of MRs, this is going to take the majority of your time, this milestone sounds like.
in terms of me also um, handling UX while we're onboarding everyone, obviously you as well, then yes, it will take up a lot of my time, this milestone, just juggling. But that isn't, if I recall, that's not what the weights necessarily refer to, but I can't bloody find.
There's 2 schools of thought on wait for agile purposes. It's yeah, is it complexity or effort? Who really knows? Um, I
Mm,
feel like you should use whatever the highest or the most impactful is. Is it super complex? Well, then it's going to take you a lot of time. Is it going to be a lot of effort? Then it's also going to take you a lot of time. And even though we're not measuring like the amount of time that we're putting in, I feel like for planning, it makes it easier if we can track like in retrospect and going forward, like how much weight we as a team can like
So just
complete in during a milestone.
looking at, obviously we're both originally from compliance. So looking at what we weighted previously, 3's classified as a simple change, but the code for it is bigger, e.g. lots of different files are test affected, requirements are clear. Whereas 5 is a more complex change that will impact multiple areas of the code base. There may be some refactoring involved. Requirements are understood, but you feel there are likely to be some gaps along the way. We should challenge ourselves to break this issue into smaller pieces.
That
3 is
sounds like a
clear.
5 though.
3 is exactly what it is. However, 5, we should challenge ourselves to break this into smaller pieces. This is definitely one of those that could have been broken down into smaller chunks, just because of the line changes involved. So it's sort of like between a 3 and a 5. Can we do 4?
No, I'd rather keep it a 3.
Because it is exactly a 3. It's just with that extra bit from 5 on top. They could have easily been broken down. If I had spent more time, rather than just thinking about the steps, actually thinking about what would be necessarily the changes involved in the steps, which I think we've discussed this in our previous
If
retro.
this was multiple issues, like what would the weight of those issues be? Would they all be 1s?
They would be 2s and 3s. But that's, again, you can't. The 2 plus a 2 is not necessarily a 5. Your 2 plus a 3 weight is not necessarily a 5 weight,
Yeah.
is it? Because it's not a
If a 3
direct.
gets split up into multiple 3-weight issues, then I feel like
Well, how often do we do a 1? Ever? It's always,
we
unless
have
it's
quite a lot of
literally
ones at the
unless
moment.
it's a single line change. Normally, it's most things are 2s, even when broken down. Most
But
things I think are 2.
I'm fine
Anyway,
with keeping this as it is.
yeah,
Um,
it's
it is more
now we've got
art than
more.
a
Now we've got more
science.
team members. We will all have more time theoretically to pay more attention and focus on a smaller set of things rather than the very wide things we've all been juggling the last few milestones. So hopefully I won't make the same mistake again. Hopefully.
So
Happened
something
before.
I linked here the list of all the issues that we have scheduled for the next milestone. Something that I wanted to
Yeah.
call out is the backend for the product analytics stack state has been scheduled.
Yep. Sweet.
So this means that we should just keep this in mind whenever we're working on the front end state, that whatever we're adding this milestone, the next milestone probably needs to be transported to the backend. So we should try and keep that work as small as possible, if at all. Then the other thing that I listed here is all the front end issues. As I've noted down below, that this seems to be all unassigned. So it would be great, I think, if we could during this call quickly like get an idea of who's going to work on what, and also pick out some like good starter issues for Alvin to start with that, you know, is like a good introduction that has like a good implementation plan and isn't too vague or, you know, it's going to cause too many headaches.
Yeah.
I feel like there's definitely a theme when it comes to the issues. Like one thing that I've identified that I would potentially like to work on is like the column chart, but I also feel like working on the UX polish in conjunction with this. And I think the UX polish still needs to, I don't see it listed here. I think it still needs to automatically slip over to this milestone. That would be like good to work on together because both are going to be working on like the contents of the panel and getting that working. That's my thinking there. The other theme here is the shared listing and updating all of that.
Yes.
Which is probably our biggest one for this milestone that you're currently working on. Also, if you need any help with like any of the MRs, please
Your
do.
reviews are my number one thing that I want from you, as a context expert, and also a very good reviewer. Picking through things, making sure things all line up and make sense. That's what I need, considering the changes involved. That's my number one preference.
Your MRs are my top priority. So as soon as I can fix my GDK, I've restarted my computer quickly before this call. So hoping, fingers crossed, that fixes my GDK. It usually does. Um, yeah,
I
then we have like a few other miscellaneous like
I
items.
I do notice there's the put an add dashboard button on the analyst listing page. This is still in problem validation.
Yeah,
And we don't have necessarily the workflow yet to actually do that.
yeah. So this is the expectation. I don't think is that we need to develop this.
Okay.
Um, when in doubt, that is my thinking. Unless like we can confirm with Sam or Dennis like why this was scheduled. My thinking is that it's scheduled so that we can get this planned.
Yeah. It needs to coincide with what Tim is doing with the visualization designer because I mean he just posted in the channel
Yeah,
the workflow for using the project and group level selection for where to retrieve the dashboard listing. So I'm assuming there is some concepts there that he's thinking of in terms of adding the button or doing that whole add flow.
agreed. Something else small that popped up that I'm probably gonna maybe just randomly pick up is the date range filtering.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
limit of
yeah.
31 days is completely erroneous and shouldn't be there.
I know why you did it. Audit events. It
And I think I
hurts.
know why it also passed by you without like a questions because it's probably the exact same reason.
Yep,
We both have like PTSD from working with slow database queries.
yep, very much
Uh,
so. Although I do get Sam made a point of maybe we should still put a restriction of say 2 years or something just for a mild bit of protection against
yeah,
DOS attacks.
I agree. Like I had something between like 180 days and like a year in mind. Um, but what
I
I'm
think
gonna
a
do,
year's valid. I don't thinking about like from my perspective as a user that has used analysis in the past, I would compare times with time against time, like a time range with another time range,
hmm,
which would be this year versus the previous year, or this month versus last month, or whatever it might be. So I'd say having that range of 1 year makes sense to me from a
even yeah, 2 years
usability point of
is
view.
as you described. Like I feel like that covers like probably 99% of use cases because you can
Yeah, there's
compare like this year versus last year.
Yeah,
Um,
I've never exceeded that. And I mean, this is a whole new product, so no one's going to have a year's worth of data anyway, but still.
yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to remove it. I'm going to change it from a
Hmm.
default to a configurable value.
Yep.
So as we change our mind or figure out like what the user wants or what our constraints are, we could easily change that. But you do bring up some good points that I think we can discuss like during our group call tomorrow.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, luckily change is cheap when it comes to just changing that configuration. Um, yeah, in terms of items that we could quickly assign, would you be up for going through this list of issues
Well,
and
the first
adding
one
assignments?
would probably make sense. Not that one. Sorry. You, that one should probably make sense to be me because I am working on all the line changes. So from a from a perspective of simplicity, I already know what needs to be stripped out and swapped over and replaced.
Cool.
I have the context, so it makes sense for me to do that, even though it is something that could possibly be given to Elwin.
Mm,
It's just I've got the context of what we had before and what we've got now.
yeah, this is going to be like a very context heavy change, I feel like, because you really need to know like what there currently is and what there is
Yeah.
going to be to like make a clean cut here.
If
Um,
if we wanted to pass it to Elwin, I would have to be a lot more prescriptive in terms of the information pan exactly what needs changing.
yeah. For this planning issue though, well, technically in problem validation.
Yeah.
This is related to the listing, but if you're at capacity, I'm happy to take this over and just guide it through the process and ping the
Um,
relevant people.
yeah, feel free. It's not specific to what I'm doing
Cool.
and can be done irrespective of or like in addition to in tangent with my changes.
We have add feature spec for dashboard query designer.
Which we need to rename that now to visualization designer.
Yeah, let me quickly do that.
And this is specifically that we have oh, what's the word? E2E, I guess, isn't it? It's an E2E spec. Feature specs are the E2E ones, aren't they? They're not the
Well,
QA
no,
ones.
we don't have E2E specs actually here because we're mocking Cube. So it's E2 backend, but it's not
It's
E2.
testing
It's
the
not full
UI.
stack E2E.
It's integration, isn't it? More features. All right, it's integration
It's
testing.
backend integration testing, yeah.
Yeah, you're testing the UI against mocked backend.
So I feel like this could potentially be something that we could like be a good starter issue because it gives
Yeah.
a good introduction into what this is and testing it. But I feel like we need to add a bit more description to the implementation plan for what it exactly is that we want tested. Looking at this, like, I don't even know, like, what should we actually test on the query designer, because there's a lot.
Visualization designer.
Or sorry, visualization designer. Because there is a lot to test there. So did you have anything in mind, like just checking the title of the page? Or
I will be perfectly honest that my level of understanding of the full functional suite of the visualization designer is the weakest out of all of our owned code base. I've not done much in terms of reviews compared to you on the visualization work.
so
So what I would do in this scenario is I would go onto the visualization designer and I would just click on things and see what it does and then replicate that in tests, if that makes
yeah, but
sense.
there's a lot of clicks.
Yeah, but what I mean is I would look at because off the top of my head, I couldn't say exactly every single thing it does. So I'd look at the general ideas of what it's doing and how it's interacting, and then want to replicate those general interactions in the specs. And then
There's a lot of interactions.
if we have more
If we're
detailed
actually
direct
adding,
interactions, then we would later on add more specific tests if there's something that doesn't get caught.
yeah, like this is the thing where the name of this issue makes me really unsure about what we're testing, because if we're adding feature specs for the entire visualization designer, I think this should have a weight of like 5 or be multiple issues. Because the visualization designer has different paths to it. It's testing all the visualization, like the panel contents as well, because you're creating the visualization. That is also something that we're not testing yet on the dashboard. So I wonder if we shouldn't do the same for the visualization designer and just test the first like step of the interaction flow and basically be like, can you select one thing and then see the first like thing that you need to see? Or does it, load up fine and connect to Cube for like the first query? But anything else
You should
beyond
still be
that,
mocking Cube. You should still be mocking Cube.
yeah, but testing it against the mock,
Yeah.
just making sure that it calls Cube.
I would want to test that you could go through the standard flow, at least initially, which is you pick, as you say, is it called a dimension on there?
Yeah.
What's it called? Initially, pick a dimension and do
Measurement.
what you measurement and
then
then
a
a
dimension.
dimension, and then be able to see the 3 panels, the data visualization and code panels, and check that the items are shown in there. I don't particularly want to test the visualization itself functions necessarily, but more that a content of visualization appears. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because then you might not be, you're not, it covers the basics, and then we can go in and be more scripted. Like you say, the current dashboard doesn't test each visualization either. Make sure that all the visualizations render exactly how we'd expect to do, because I'd expect the unit test to handle that.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to know that visualization was rendered, not that it rendered exactly how I'd expect it to necessarily.
Yeah. So I think your idea is good. Like test the first flow of your picking a measurement, picking a dimension, and then we're just confirming that those 3 panels are shown.
Yeah.
And that's it. At the start, like the visualization isn't going to be shown because you also need to pick a visualization, which is yet another interaction. But I feel like that's by default. I think the first thing that's shown is the data panel or the data table. So it's showing you the results. So I think that's actually the most important.
Iterate. It's better to have some test than no test.
Yeah. Okay, we can start out with that.
It also, in the implementation plan, it says query designer again.
Yeah, it's going to do like everywhere for like
I know,
everything.
I know. And that's fine.
Cool. I'll assign this to myself temporarily just to confirm that this makes sense. And then I'll think about moving this to Alvin, else I'll just
Yeah,
complete this myself.
if he's up for taking it on, then it's a good way of him getting graphs with what the visualization designer is and how it functions.
Yeah.
Without necessarily editing the direct code base. So that makes sense.
Then the next one we have is determine where to put instrumentation details after sharing the dashboard listing. Yeah, do you have any context of like what the latest discussions is
If you scroll down,
influencing
I
this?
believe there's a comment which I have not got back to this. It's been
Okay.
on the lowest priority, which Dennis, we've had our one-to-ones, and I have apologized and said it's just really low on my priority list. Because we don't technically need it for internal preview. It's just something that would be really nice to have. So the answer to this is it needs to be thought out from a user flow perspective, but most likely scenario is there will be a configure. We already have the concept of a configuration screen, which hasn't been built, and we would put it in there with that button to then take you off to the view screen that we already have, and probably the other concept, which I think Dennis notes in his thing, is a way of regenerating keys. There's a kind of the 2 details: viewing your instrumentation details and resetting your instrumentation details.
But I feel like
In case of
that is a
breach.
separate issue.
Yeah, that is a separate issue, but the general concept of that page is where this is going to probably end up leading to. And then we would add that next, that regeneration, because that requires back-end work as well as front-end and all with stuff. It doesn't exist as a concept yet, but that's the idea. So this is more or less a UX conversation, not a front-end one just yet.
Okay, so should we move this then to design?
Well, I guess the problem validation is figuring out, is that considering confirming the problem?
I feel like the
Can't remember what
problem
the word.
has been confirmed here, and we're just trying to figure out like how to
I don't
visually
know. I don't know
like add
where.
this to the page. I would say adding this on like a 3-dot button, like with a drop down or something to the each row, so that it's not super visible, but you can still see it, or adding it as like an icon button to the row on the listing would make sense. But
Yeah, we have a concept of a menu eventually.
yeah, it's like if you look at like the admin users like table, there's like a bunch of actions, on each
So
item. But I
there
feel like
is.
we could move this to design so that our new UX designer knows, like
Yeah,
can easily
it's
identify this.
we need to come up with solutions on how to solve the problem visually before we start figuring out how to solve it technically, I guess.
Yeah, I'll note that here in the comments.
Yeah, it's figuring out the flow of figure out the flow to solve the problem. The problem exists. As I said before, our new handbook page needs to list out our workflow again, like it did on compliance, so I can just go reference it every time I need to know which label to apply.
Right. Then, so in that case, I'll leave this unassigned because it's a UX issue. Put an add
You,
dashboard button on the, like we just talked about this.
yeah, you assigned yourself to that
Yeah.
temporarily.
And then we have add a visual indicator to dashboard panels when in edit mode. This is honestly, I've not looked at this issue at
No,
all. I'm not sure
bravo.
if, okay.
Yeah, that code tab's always confused me.
Yeah.
It feels like the primary action, but it's not necessarily that. But that is a separate UX issue to what he's describing here. So he's basically saying that when you go into edit mode, there's no visual indicator other than the code button that you are actually in an editable environment.
Yeah, but this seems like it needs to be in design or
Yeah, it's a
one
design
of
question.
one of the early phases. I'm also just gonna tentatively mark this as
It is very much a design question, a UX question, a user flow question.
because this isn't something that's actionable for us right now. Then we have add cube.js to renovate bot. I do think this is very valid, and I also created this
Yes.
issue.
Yes.
How
We're now
exactly this works, I have no idea. This might also potentially be a good starter issue, although it doesn't give any context to what we're actually doing.
it's yeah, I guess I don't think we have to argue why we have to, because the dependency is now part of GitLab. So we don't need to argue the case for why Cube needs to be added to GitLab. We've done that.
Yeah.
This is just adding it so it auto updates.
And creates a review for us to, or
Yeah,
creates an MR for us to review.
which I personally feel doesn't need proving. What it does need is to make sure that it gets assigned to the right people in the right way. As
Yeah.
in our team.
Yeah.
I think this would be great because manually doing this, we're never going to do it. Or if we
No.
do, we're going to do it slapdash, and there might be a security release that we don't even notice.
Yeah, like this is already I'll note here that whoever picks this up should ask Ippy for help, because he's also like the person I think that's just
Bot
this.
King.
Yes. Or Bot King, or resident Bot King. Unless you want to pick this up, I'll hesitantly maybe pick it up and consider this also as a starter issue for Alvin. But I feel like the feature one is better.
Yeah, features understanding the code base is a better option for starter. This is just a simple starter because it's relatively straightforward. I'm happy to pick this up if you are at capacity. It just will probably be midway through the milestone before I get to it. That's all.
I'll assign it to myself for now, since after your reviews, I should have some capacity to start working on stuff again. So let me first take more of a look also at this and see if I can also add, because this is ready for development without a actual implementation plan or any real context. So let me first try and find that out. And then if I won't be able to work on it, I'll just unassign myself after doing that.
Okay.
Then we're already 3 minutes over time, so I want to quickly get through these. The column charts, like I said, I'm happy to take this on. I think this would also be actually a good starter because it
I was
gives,
going to say,
yeah,
really good starter. We have context already with other charts.
exactly. You have examples there. It gives an idea of the overall architecture of how it flows from a view component from GitLab UI into a view component that we have for analytics, into the data sources that transforms it, and then onto the panel. So I'm going to tentatively assign this to myself to assign back to Alvin, or ask him if he wants to take this over.
I think all this needs really is an implementation plan.
Yeah.
Maybe a mock-up of the column chart, but we're using the standard GL chart, GitLab UI charts,
Yeah.
aren't we? So well, actually, we need to start using that widget, don't we? That new
When
e-chart
that is ready, I don't think it's as soon as the
isn't
documentation
already.
is updated, I think it's ready, but it's still if you go to what's the page on Storybook, I still think it shows the old documentation, which indicates to me that it's not a standard wrapper yet.
It should be under. Oh, I can't remember. Where is it? It's. Oh yeah, the e-charts wrapper.
So this just says it's like a wrapper, but I don't know if
Yeah, that
it's
is exactly it. They're going to remove all these other charts on the left-hand side and replace it with this wrapper that's pretty much just allowing you to reference the
yeah.
e-chart library
But this
with
hasn't
some
been marked
proxying.
as like deprecated or anything yet. So I'll just note on the issue to reach out to the foundations team to also find out as part of the implementation because
I mean, if we want to just go column chart for now, because that e-chart wrapper will need to update all of our charts to
yeah,
match that. So I'm happy for us to go column chart for now, and then have a separate issue to update all of our charts to e-chart later on.
yeah.
We want to do that.
This is another a good
Yeah. Hmm.
issue to start out with.
Definitely.
I'll also tentatively assign this to myself and then ask Alvin the question. Um, yeah, that is it. I need to run in the next 30 seconds. So
Yeah.
unless there's
Right.
anything else to add, I think we can end the call.
No, just keep me in the loop on from Elwin or yourself for any dashboard related changes, so I can make sure that the listing is reflective of those changes.
Will do.
Bro.
Cool. It's nice to talk as always. And yeah, goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day.
And you speak to you, everyone tomorrow. Ciao.
Ciao.